All right, you guys, welcome back to Freedom Papers. This is Morgan Zegers. Thanks to Turning Point USA for putting this show on. And now we have contract required appearance, just kidding, from the one and only Jack Poso. Hello.
This was a contractual obligation. I was required to do at least one per session while I'm here. So here I am. Thanks.
Ugh, I know. I have to rub my eyes and be like, wait, you're not Connor Clegg.
No.
Who are you?
No,
what do you do?
I don't even have a mustache.
Why are you even here?
Like Connor's.
Are you qualified to discuss these important topics?
I think so.
America's founding and the Federalist ratification debate?
I did grow up in and around Philadelphia, so we did get a little...
That's promising.
No, see, that's the funny thing about coming from that area is so like, where I grew up was actually right next to Valley Forge, and then we would go to Philadelphia a lot. We got married in Valley Forge, me and Tanya.
I had no idea.
And yeah. So like, that's a huge part of my upbringing is that like we would go there, see the sites, learn the history, understand, what these men fought for during all that time. And actually, like when I was little, my parents, and we would go to Valley Forge like pretty much every weekend. And back then you could still go, and you can't do it anymore, but they would let you like go and play on like the actual fortifications that were built by the Continental Army when they stayed there. It's basically like, earthen mounds that have like grass and stuff grown over them now. But that's, when I learned to fly a kite, when I would go sledding in the winter, or just be like running around with my brother, that was literally in Valley Forge on the battlements of the Continental Army.
That's so interesting. I don't know if you knew this. I grew up by the Saratoga Battlefield, a couple miles away.
Epic.
And so we did the same thing. It's a place where they've made it a really great spot for families to go, for people to drive through, and there's walking trails, riding trails for horses, all that stuff. So I think it really helps children
My
too.
parents actually met in Valley Forge riding horses. Well, my mom was riding horses. My dad was doing something he probably shouldn't be doing.
I love that.
But
Kids.
like, so that's always been, so that's, and then so we ended up getting married so we got engaged at the Washington Chapel in Valley Forge, and then ended up getting married at the Freedom Foundation, which is right next to it. Mm-hmm. And so, when people talk about like, Poso, why are you into this stuff? Why do you care about all these old whatever? It's like, I grew up with this. I grew up thinking that this was, the great part of our country. This is what made us special. This is what sets us apart from the rest of human history. That, why my family came here from Poland. And like, you look at Eastern Europe right now and the craziness that's going on. And it's like, it gives me more of an appreciation for why my family left and why they wanted to come to a place where people were doing something new. And so growing up with that kind of background, and of course, later as I got older, I realized like, oh, wait, you guys weren't paying attention to all the stuff that those guys were talking about. Like that wasn't a big deal for you. Oh, okay. I'm the only one who actually believed this stuff. Like, okay, I see how it is. Right. And so you learn about what they fought for, and then this incredible system that they built. And then as you get older, you think, wow, this is so amazing. This is wonderful. And then you realize, when you start to look at the United States the way it's constituted now, you realize that we don't really follow any of the things that they wrote anymore. And you and I were talking, before we came on this, that, that was one thing that when you look at the situation we have now of the government that we live in, it clearly doesn't follow any of these ideals or principles anymore. And maybe, pays lip service to them here and there. But I think it is very, not only important, but seminal to understanding where we come from as a people, understand where we're going, why these principles were put in place, but then also understanding, what happened along the road over the past 100 years or so that kind of, just drove us into this different place where we find ourselves now, where we have our flag, we have our Constitution, and yet nobody actually seems to follow the words that were written. They're, our politicians aren't reading the Federalist Papers. They should be, and they should be listening to Freedom Papers, of course, to give them, an update on this. But I think going into the history of how things changed and got to where we are is useful for understanding the system under which we live in now, but then also understanding, okay, if that's the situation, how do we reform it? So it's like, this is like book 1 of the series, maybe book 2, but now we're in like book 15. So you got to go back to figure out where we are. Yeah,
no, what a kickoff to the episode. Jack, thank you for coming on. First of all, I know you're very busy here, and you're very busy in general, but while you're in Arizona, I'm glad that we could grab you on for the show. you and I were talking earlier, and I was really happy that you said this before we started filming, that you wanted to focus on what went wrong, specifically the history and the timeline of it. Because I don't know how much you know of this, but we try, when it's just me and Connor, if it's just me and we don't have a guest, we read one of the anti-federalist or federalist papers, and we really delve into it. So we're only at like 20 or 24, I think, at this point, which means we haven't gotten to that second section of the papers where you look into the actual intended structure of the government. Right now we're just in why we should be a union and why that would be the best instead of dissolving. So we're really early into it, but we have had this constant theme that, first of all, it's not that the anti-federalists and federalists were wrong in the government that they created. Instead, it's that our politicians today and our society today has completely abandoned the principles, and they aren't referring to or honoring and respecting what our founders intended. It's not that they went wrong. So where did it go wrong? Where did things really get screwed up? Let's say it like that politely. Well, and if we could get started on that, what are your first thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that if you go back to this, so a lot of it is based around, economics, right? And so economics drives history the same way that, you could say like history is also the history of great men, and like going back to Alexander the Great. And, these are the drivers of history many times, but economics plays a huge role. And so, I think we have to look at the founding of America through an economic lens, understanding that this was written for an agrarian society, but then the Industrial Revolution comes around, right? And that changes a lot of things in terms of the balance of power in society. Many people say that in some ways, certainly at least the United States' purposes, that the Civil War was the first industrial war, right? Because you had railroads, you started to see firearms being used on a industrial basis as opposed to sort of the flintlocks of before. And so this really is the first time that kicks that off. But then that also kicks off this era known as the Progressive Era in the United States. And you had some people who were saying, well, we're for workers' rights, and we want to, have a better balance between workers and owners and the haves and the have-nots, and then navigate that in such a way that's more, to use a popular word, equitable for people on both sides of that, because people could see that some people were getting insanely rich while other people were living in like abject squalor, right? In like tenements or, indentured servants and all this stuff that, the fact, you look at the factory conditions in the North, right? And so this is the issue that the United States grappled with in a way that, by the way, of course, as we can see, the way the Industrial Revolution grappled Europe, you get the rise of communism, the rise of fascism, you get insane wars that are going back and forth, and it all goes back to the same issue of not being able to deal with that. But there was another thread that arose through this progressive era, and it was the rise of the German school, really the Frankfurt School, and their thought through through academia, through the research institution, and then eventually through the writings and the work of President Woodrow Wilson, probably more than anyone else, any other one figure, the rise of this idea that there could be this administrative organism, an administrative state, a living organism, if you will, that constitutes the actual government itself. So that this idea that government could be something other than the representatives who were elected, and that's obviously what all this is about, but that government could be some separate entity away from politics and away from representation that just perpetuated itself and existed on its own, not necessarily under one of the three branches that are written about in the Federalist Papers or the Constitution, but this own living organism. And as Woodrow Wilson wrote, he called it the living state. Or this is the same thing a lot of people refer to today when they talk about the administrative state or the permanent state, or more colloquially we'll say the permanent state or deep state, or whatever you call it, right? There's this idea that I take Dr. Fauci as a great example of this, by the way. So Dr. Fauci is an unelected bureaucrat, some guy who works, he's a federal government employee, right? He's not elected to anything. He's never stood for election in his life, as far as I know. He was like a county commissioner or something somewhere. But somehow he has the ability to set policy for a local school board, right? A local school district thousands of miles away from Washington, D.C., and can even countermand the decisions of that school board and even of that governor. And I don't, want to go down the rabbit hole of Fauci and lockdowns and masks and all that, but I think it's illustrative because it's so right in your face and everybody knows about this, to understand that something is deeply, deeply wrong with our system when an unelected bureaucrat from Washington, D.C. has the power to be able to countermand all the elected representatives of the people. The flow of power somehow has been broken. And so I think for a lot of conservatives out there, you have to kind of like push this like software upgrade to understand that we had this great system, but it degraded over time, it corrupted over time. A lot of the moral framework of our country corrupted at around the same time. And this led to deep failings in it, to the point where now we believe more in this Wilsonian idea of a permanent state, right? Follow the science, follow the data. Where does this come from? This is all Wilsonian. It's social Darwinism, right? Is a huge part of this as well. This idea that through data, through science, we can know everything, we can control everything. That's where truth comes from. That's where power comes from. We shouldn't listen to, we people are flawed and crude and we have no idea what's going on, and it's only through science. And so this is where you actually get, right, you actually get this worship of science, and which isn't even science itself, that's scientism. So that's belief in a scientist as some greater, higher being, rather than someone who's attempting research, that's groping around in the dark, trying to figure out, what makes our world tick, rather, and then also, of course, you're not allowed to challenge it, right?
Yeah.
How dare you?
Science.
Right, he is the science. And so this idea that you're not allowed to challenge it, when actually, obviously, if you understand the scientific method, it's all about challenge. The whole point of it is, please challenge my results. Please try to, because you're improving the science by doing that. But all of this comes from the mixing of these scientific theories and social Darwinism with our government structure itself. And I got to tell you, Morgan, unfortunately, it seems as though those ideas are the ones that are actually holding out, not the original ideas in the original system as it was set out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem here, is we're completely far away from what our founders intended. And I wonder if there's even an opportunity for us to fix it. I mean, if you think about the average family, we're paying tens of thousands of dollars to this federal government, that it seems like we're never going to be able to positively change things. So is there any hope? Like what I like to do, we had Paul Gosar on, and he did such a good job of explaining the problem and the step-by-step solutions for, okay, well, what happened is the legislature was supposed to be the elected body that is in control of the funds, the taxpayer dollars, and the decision-making, the lawmaking. And what they ended up doing was signing these huge bills with huge amounts of money attached to them, and just handing over that decision-making and money allocating power to the executive branch. And that turned into this permanent living organism that it is. And so he was explaining, well, if we really want to fix it, we would have to elect as enough people that understand this problem and could walk it all back. And we'd also have to have a president that would want to give up those powers as well. So what do you see? And if we're going to talk about solutions and understanding where this all started, you said the Frankfurt School and those German ideas, is that really the core problem that led to these bills as well, or do you see them as separate issues?
Well, no, I mean, I think what you're describing, right, it's cause and effect, right? So it starts with the Frankfurt School, certainly, and then Gosar, in terms of that, is completely correct. That's exactly right, that it really is the legislature that has completely abrogated its power. This is, by the way, when you look at the Supreme Court fight right now that's going on as we tape this, that with Ketanji Brown Jackson, that why do they care so much about a Supreme Court nominee? Why did they care so much about Brett Kavanaugh? Because they know that the law, quote unquote, power doesn't come from the legislature anymore. The legislature is just kind of there for show. And that real power is through, and the courts have been doing this all the way back to Roe v. Wade, right? That they are the ones leading policy through that. So we had Roe v. Wade decided, so abortion, obviously one of the most contentious issues in America, decided through the courts. Obergefell, so same-sex marriage, one of the most contentious issues in the United States, decided through the courts, not put up to any vote, not put up to our elected representatives. Obviously, this is not the way our system is supposed to function, regardless of what side you are on either of those issues. And at the same token, then, the administrative state carries out the wishes of the judiciary in these rulings, and then that's the way power flows. So then the judiciary, many of which are coming from academia joined at the hip with this this administrative state, this permanent state. And so this is where you get Yarvin's idea of leaky sovereignty, this idea that the sovereignty of our federal republic that was supposed to be enshrined in these representatives has now leaked out into the permanent state and into the judiciary in a sense where you have the judiciary now making laws, right, from the Supreme Court, from the bench, which obviously they're not supposed to be doing. Congress isn't really doing much of anything other than the purse strings, which is, and to be fair, that's why a lot of these government shutdown fights become such a big deal, because they do still kind of have that power left. And then finally, the president has this massive power over the federal executive party, the federal executive branch. And so, one thing that I would certainly look at is, you've got to address these things for any candidate or any movement that wants to come up, right? Governor DeSantis right now is signing a law that's saying, kind of setting out these guidelines for how people should talk to grade school, I think it's K through 3, about sexual orientation and some of these topics, setting out guidelines, pretty strict restrictions on what you can and can't say, because, we should be teaching, basic math at that age, and reading and, spelling and some of these, real basic stuff. Like, we're not going to get into, the paddleboard trip with our partner, when you're at that age. And so with that being said, and I do support this, by the way, I do support this bill, but at the same time, you got to understand that all of the teachers that are out there, or a vast majority of them, at least at this point, are completely against it. Because you have one side, the left in this country, that has been recruiting and training their people, their activists, to take these roles in the same way, which certainly is part of this federal giant oligarchy that we've created, this organism. And whereas on the right, on the traditional side, on the conservative side, or people who are just kind of in the middle, you don't have any recruitment process. You don't have any training program. Like, where do you replace these people with? Where's the pool of talent to come in? So personnel is policy, but it's at the higher levels and at the lower levels. And so there isn't any one magic bullet, right? You actually have to do the work. And whether it is through this Marcusean idea of a long march through the institutions, or you have to go and take the institutions back one by one in this country. And that does require people to be trained, people to be hired, people to be recruited. This is, by the way, something that, not a contractual obligation, but TPUSA is a great example of an organization that is at least trying to identify talent in a lot of these key areas, and then placing them, or at least working with these types of talent to be able to go on and do greater things in those various fields, because this is something that needs to be done. These ideas, the Federalist Papers, are constitutional ideas. These need to be promoted and championed, and the only way you can do that is through that type of recruitment process. So no, I know Tyler and Charlie are going to be like, Jack said it, haha. But it really does require organizations like that working with a purpose and a mission, going forward from the lower levels all the way up, in order to put that in place. Then at the same time, though, you can start from a higher level with elected representatives and elected officials, and potentially more presidents, just going at this Gorgon from the top down. And, when you can find certain examples of people who should be fired, people who should be prosecuted, keep in mind that you would only have to fire, a certain amount of them for, the others to kind of get in line.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of the way things are going. But you've got to pass new laws, and you've got to be able to put these types of restrictions on that permanent state. And by the way, whether it be healthcare, whether it be education, whether it be the intelligence community, the military, our Pentagon is like a joke right now. They're ridiculous. Yeah. You can start to do these things and then actually start to right the ship. But, I was a Navy officer, and, they say you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. It's very slow. And so when you look at an entire country that spent 100 years and really ramped up in the last 30 years in one direction, it's going to take time to turn it back. And so it's going to create a multi-pronged, multifaceted system in order to be able to do that. And so I hope people I don't think that's disheartening when I think about this, but I do tell people, like, this is a generational fight. This is a generational struggle, and there's never going to be one, like, I got in a little heat recently because I was on the Tim Pool show.
Oh, what'd you say?
And somebody asked me about the Convention of States. Oh. And they said, what do you think about the Convention of States? And I was like, no. I was just like, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a waste of time. And they're like, what do you mean? How dare you? We care so much about the Constitution. The Constitution was created through a Convention of States. Don't you understand your history? And I'm like, dude, you have any idea how many times I've been to Independence Hall in my life? Like I know. But my point is that you can't keep trying to find this one silver bullet to fix the problem, because you have to address the problem and understand the problem, and to take things even back to a higher level or a deeper level, depending how you look at it. A lot of these things only work if it's based in traditional morality that comes from God. And if you take that out of society, which you notice that was the first thing they did, that was the first thing the social Darwinists targeted, was God, removing God from the public square. If you take God out of all this stuff, it all falls apart. None of it works because there's no backstop, there's no leverage, right? There's no leverage point on any of these people to say, well, you shouldn't do this. Why? Because it's immoral. Well, who's to say? Right. And that's how you can get this moral relativism of a Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson saying, well, shouldn't, you might say that a person who compiles that many, images of child pornography is a criminal, but aren't they really a victim of society and a victim of the internet and these new forms of communication, et cetera, because you can just make up your own morality at this point. You have choose your own morality, and that's basically where we are as a country. And you have people who are saying, using moral relativism, saying, oh, well, I think actually the person who you might view as a perpetrator, well, I think they're more of the victim because of the systemic, et cetera, that's been placed on them, versus, some of us who might come in and say, well, what about the children who were directly victimized, not these indirect issues. And PolitiFact even came after me for that, by the way. They did.
Saying that.
PolitiFact came after me for that because I was saying that my opinion was she seems to think that's not a big deal. And they were saying, oh, well, no, she was making a point based on the judicial ruling and the review. I said, no, I get what her point was. I'm disagreeing with her point on a moral view, right? My moral view is that if there's more images of the children, then that means there's more victims of the children, then that makes it worse, and you should give them harsher punishments, not lighter punishments. I'm making a moral argument here, but because these people have no morality, they say, well, you improperly contextualized, and as if I wasn't arguing with the facts. I was not arguing the facts whatsoever.
But your opinion was wrong. So you got fact checked.
My opinion was wrong, so my opinion was fact checked. And it just goes to show you, like, this is what happens when you strip God from society, when you strip that moral core, that moral center, right? That we're all sinners, 100% of us, right? You will not find a sinless person this side of Christ. Doesn't work that way. But we can all strive to be better. And that's what the purpose of the Bible is. That's what the purpose of God's teaching is to give us that moral center and that moral core. And so if we're basing our government around that, rather than an authoritarian government, which is just based on force, right? A government that's based on these Nietzschean ideas of will to power, which, there are countries out there like that. There's, you can look at Russia, you can look at the CCP. There are other countries that have different, different structures than ours. If we want to have this kind of system and to have this type of government, we've got to be able to go back to that shared moral core and moral center. And if we don't, I guarantee you, our country and what we're looking at right now is this system morphing into that kind of same system that we saw in the CCP. I saw this when I was working in Shanghai. We would have politicians come over, and so that was the whole idea about, why is the U.S. doing deals with China, right? And they would always say, well, it's great because, it's a comparative advantage. Like, they can build stuff and they can manufacture it faster, and that's better for American people because they get cheaper TVs, et cetera. So it's really going to be good and everyone benefits, right? Okay. And by the way, but aren't they communists? No, don't worry about that, because if they are exposed to our system more, it's going to make them open up, and then maybe they'll become a democracy, just like magically overnight through osmosis or something. I don't know. And they never quite explained that part. It was always one of those things where it's like, step one, okay. Step two, I don't know. Step three, we win. Like, how do we win? Don't worry about that. And so that's not what I saw. I would be working in Shanghai in international business, and we would bring together like congressional delegations or government delegations or like business leaders. They would all come in and they'd sit down with the CCP and they would say, wow, so if you guys want to build, a maglev train, you just get the people out of your way, all those people who own those homes, all those things like property rights, just get rid of them. Yeah. Kick them all out. So you throw them out of the way, you build your maglev. Let's say you want to build a railroad from Beijing all the way to Pakistan, and you've got this group of people called the Uyghurs in your way. Well, they all get thrown in camps, right? That's the CCP model. And there's no way for them to fight back because there's no respect for rights or individual property. Actually, the way they translate, it's beautiful, the way they do this. The way they translate the word communism into Chinese is 共产主义. So 共产主义, 共产is itself, you know what it actually means?
No.
Public property. So the ideology of public property, which means, and when you take Marxism, right, which is kind of the opposite of the US system, and really just boil it down, that's what it comes down to, that the abolition of private property, the abolition of private personal rights, private property rights is communism.
Yeah. So can I ask, what do you think about property taxes?
Well, I'm not somebody who says that we shouldn't have, any kind of taxes. I do think they're ridiculous. And I say that as a homeowner, that, I should have to pay taxes on what I, something that I own and something that I provide for. But at the same time, we also live on a lake that's a privately owned lake, but we share the ownership with like the whole neighborhood. And it's something where I'm not libertarian when it comes down to that stuff. I do think that there's an understandable, balance that to be had of public services, but as long as your actual property taxes are going to the public services, which, as we've seen, doesn't always seem to be the case.
Interesting. I was talking to someone in Texas, because my home's in Texas, and he's also a homeowner in Texas, and he was saying, I think property taxes are the most anti-American version of a tax, and they are completely opposite of what our founders intended for us. And if you don't pay your property taxes, your private property is taken from you. And I find that quite interesting, and so I like to hear other.
I get the argument. No,
I like to hear people's perspective on it, because I never thought about it either. It's just we grow up and this is our government.
It's the idea being that if the government can tax you on something, and then if you don't pay your taxes, you can be penalized, and the government can take it away. Then is it really do you really have ownership? Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I love the argument, and I love that energy, because I think we do need that energy, and that is a very American type of energy. It also, I would be somebody who, I think the income tax, though, is to me one of the things that's so indelible to the progressive right, the income tax and the Federal Reserve, right? So the Federal Reserve is actually one of the biggest taxing institutions in the country. Yeah. And the reason being is because of inflation. They control inflation because our money is no longer tied to anything. We argue sometimes on Human Events that, there is a tie between the US dollar and foreign oil trades. It's a little bit abstract, but it's this idea that because we require, and we use the power of the United States, we require that oil sales be done in US dollar-backed amounts, that even if it's a foreign trade, that it still artificially raises the price of the US dollar. So it's kind of backed on the US on oil sales. So this idea of the petrodollar. And so with that, though, inflation is a tax. Inflation is a tax on your money. So inflation is going crazy right now. So if you're not making more money, if you're not getting a raise that's higher than inflation, you're actually losing money every time you get a paycheck.
Well, and did you hear that they're telling us to save $5,000 for inflation this year? $5,000. Most American families don't have $1,000 to save.
We're currently living through the largest middle class tax hike that we've seen in 40 years.
It's insane.
And this is something where, I just said I'm not super libertarian when it comes to the property tax stuff, but I'll throw it out. Ron Paul was 100% right about this. Yeah. Inflation is the most evil tax because people don't even realize it's going on, and it's being done by the government to the people. Yeah.
It hurts the average people the most.
Well, I always talk about the Cantillon effect on Human Events. And what is the Cantillon effect? And it's this French economist And he realized that when he was studying the French kingdom, the Kingdom of France, or the Kingdom of Gaul at the time, I think it was called, he realized that when a new gold mine was discovered somewhere in the kingdom, that you'd think that it would be the people in and around the gold mine that would benefit from the gold coming in, or maybe like the workers or someone who had a stake in the ownership. No. The people who benefited from the new gold were the people closest to the king.
Why
the
is
people
that?
closest to the throne, because they got access to the gold first. And then they went and spent it. And this idea was that if you spend it, then it will trickle out into the economy, right? But that's not what happened. What happened was the inflationary pressure was pushed down from the people closest to the king to the people furthest away from the king. So the people who were furthest away from the king weren't the ones getting the gold directly. So their prices are all going up like crazy, while there's just a buying frenzy going on from the people closest to the king, because they're just buying up everything they can, which is driving all the prices up because you're basic supply and demand. So you see the exact same thing going on right now when it comes to the Federal Reserve and the money printer and the insane amount of money printing that's going on in this country. And all of that money is going to their buddies, like people over at BlackRock, who are just buying up all the housing. You don't have to worry about property tax because BlackRock is going to be the property owner anymore, right? So millennials, Zoomers, et cetera, like we don't even have to care about that, because that's going to be for BlackRock. They're going to be your, your landowner, your homeowner, and we're going to own nothing and be happy.
Yeah, well, let's get into that, because you've got the Federal Reserve, you got the Department of Education, you have all of these massive, like, Great Depression era pieces of legislation that started some massive bureaucratic offices that we're never going to see the end of, it feels like. Can we get into the history of that? Where you made that great connection to me yesterday off camera of Wilson being president of Princeton?
President of Princeton, yeah.
Can you make that connection, and then how we ended up with these massive agencies?
Well, so it's the idea.
A little history lesson for us, Jack.
Well, I think it goes to kind of what we said a minute ago about how there's this idea that through scientism, right, the worship of science, that you can know everything, study everything, and be the full repository of knowledge within one institution. And that the idea being then, if you worship the institution, if you worship data, if you worship science, then it stands to reason that you'll use the greatest resource allocator in any country, of course, being the federal government, to create the largest and most powerful institutions. And therefore, the largest and most powerful institutions will be these massive repositories of knowledge, right? And then so that leads us, of course, we in the real world know we have a Department of Agriculture that doesn't produce food. We have a Department of Energy that doesn't produce energy. We have a Department of Education that doesn't educate anybody, and so on and so forth down the line. So we all know that, no, if you want food, you have to talk to a farmer, a rancher. If you want energy, you go talk to, someone in the oil gas industry. If you want education, you talk to like a good teacher, right? Obviously, these are the people who know how to make this stuff come up. But you have these people who end up, and it's through this misguided, I think science is a wonderful thing. I think science obviously has been great for our country and great for our society, but at the same time, we cannot worship it, because if you put it at the heart of everything, then you try to make government subservient itself to this belief in science, rather than government simply being this administration of what's going on beneath. And so that's the split where, spoiler alert, where the Federalist Papers arguments come down to. It's, you do have this argument over, do we want something that leans more towards monarchy, or do we want something that leans more towards this like loose confederation, like the articles originally were? And so what we ended up with was something that's around like the, 25, 30% mark. And that was the original system, was the idea of having an administration that's strong enough to be an administrator, but at the same time allowing it to open up for free market competition at the local levels, and then direct power being held as close to the people as possible. That was the original system. And it worked very, very, very well right up until this progressive era, which also, of course, comes at the back of the Industrial Revolution. And why do I bring that up so much? Because we're living through another economic revolution right now, and that's the tech revolution. And so we need to make sure that we do not respond to this revolution governmentally the same way that we responded to the Industrial Revolution by just growing and expanding these massive government institutions. I mean, think of it. You've probably got people out there already thinking of, oh, we need an administration of science and technology. We need a department of the internet, department of this, department of that. And that, I guarantee you, that is how these people think. And we were talking before about this idea of like a digital bill of rights.
That's been on my mind so much lately. This idea that your right to free will and to consciousness, based on what these crazy people are saying in big tech, needs to be written down. I want it written down.
Well, I think we do, because I think you need to have ownership of your digital self in the same way that you have ownership of your physical self.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that if you're a digital native, right, everything you've done, everything you've clicked on for your entire life, from the very first time you ever logged onto a system anywhere, right, is recorded somewhere, and that there is this sort of cybernetic version of you that exists separate from you, and that you've got these corporations making massive windfalls off of it. Like if you're downloading it's become a cliche at this point, but if you're downloading a free app, the app isn't free, you're the product, right? Yeah. Because your data is being tracked, and then that data is being sold in the open market. And this is $1 billion, actually trillion dollar industry.
Well, I don't know if you knew this, I used to work in advertising before politics. And
okay, so
I
you know,
scheduled national media commercials. Yeah. And I remember first being briefed on like companies that actually did sell audio data. And I was like, oh, that's real? Like you know how we joke about like, oh, my phone's listening to me and that's why I see these ads. That's real. And when I was just being presented with that information and the amount of money that people get for transitioning this kind of stuff, I was like, we're in over our heads, I think, with what we said. And now we have these international figures. This is what I get nervous about, because it's not like we can elect these people out of an office because we don't like their leadership style. You have these people like Klaus Schwab, is that his name? Actually on many videos talking about how eventually they're going to be able to control us because they're going to know every decision that we want to make, and that we are going to lose our ability to have our own consciousness because they're going to be able to handle things for us. Have you ever read... that freaks me out.
Have you ever read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley?
No, I will though.
You need to read that, because so it's written about 100 years ago, and it's a society that has split in two. So most of the people who live in the cities are people who live in these like phantasmagoric, constant instant gratification of everything society. You can get drugs for free. There's no like relationships are just purely transactional. Like he actually kind of predicted like Tinder, and all of this stuff. And it's just constant consumerism. And that's what's going on in the cities. And people are just kind of assigned at birth, what kind of job you're going to have and everything like that. But those people, when they want to go on vacation, they go to these observation posts over what they call the flyover land, and they look at the savages. And the savages are the people who live in the middle of the country.
It's like me.
And yeah, you're one of the savages, 100%. And that's what I was getting
the
at.
Homesteaders.
Yeah, so it's like homesteaders and people who grow up without like all of the pharmaceuticals and everything that are just like, required for everybody. And you can go, and so the people from the cities will go in and like observe these people and the quaint and backward, crazy way that they live, as if it's some 19th century European village, just fishing and farming and hunting and living with their families. And as savages. Yeah. And I was like, that's Morgan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got to check that. Well, then the plot of the book is that one of the savages then like comes to the city and they get to know him and et cetera, et cetera.
A revolution.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. I mean, it reminds me, I interview a lot of people from like communist China and stuff. It's a little passion of mine. And I was listening to someone explain, he was a college student around the Tiananmen Square massacre period. Sure. And around the 80s, they started to open up. And after raising up all these kids in the 70s and 80s to think, oh, the poor West, they're suffering and we must save them with our Eastern ideals and our ideas of communism. All these little kids were propagandized into that mentality. But then when they were allowed to go over to Canada and to the US and to a few other areas to start going to university, they were like, oh, the West doesn't need us to save them. We need to fix our own country. But then by the time the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, they realized that probably wasn't going to happen. And so they had this hope almost after getting to experience the other world. And then the Tiananmen Square massacre really smacked that down.
Well, there's this, and that's kind of the thing with China now, is so following the events of Tiananmen, and it sort of became this new policy for the CCP that, because keep in mind, so Tiananmen happens 1989, the fall of the Soviet Union happens 2 years later. And so because the fall of the Soviet Union happened prior to the CCP ever falling, they were able to study this, and they obsessively studied the fall of the Soviet Union. And they realized it was because people had been exposed to the West and had been exposed to these other ideas that they were not able to continue on in the fashion of communism. But they realized then, so they opened up a sort of dual track new system whereby they brought in, KFC and McDonald's and Saks Fifth Avenue and all of the stuff that you'd see in like Manhattan. And so we're going to buy people off with this sort of form of like hyper capitalism in a sense on
but
the
still
economic
controlled by the
side,
state.
but there's no political freedom whatsoever. So political expression of rights, individual rights, freedom of speech, any of those things, not on the table whatsoever. And so people come up with so many different words for it. State capitalism is a pretty good one as far as I've heard, but it really is this hybrid system or in Chinese, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. But because they'll still use like the hammer and sickle and the symbology and everything else, but
and they're involved in all the companies.
Oh, they're involved in everything. Not just the companies. I mean, they're involved in everything. In China, like that's, and they've always been that way.
Well, that's why people say that about Venezuela too. Well, they have X% private companies, so they aren't socialist. And China's not communist
those
or
are
anything.
state-owned enterprises.
It's like, well, how do you think it works behind closed doors? They just put their people in charge of things.
Well, so it's actually even more insidious than that. So, what they'll do is that when you get started in your career, whether in school or you might be from one of the big families, Xi Jinping, his father was part of the Long March with Mao Zedong, and so they're called these princelings. You have this whole generation of sort of like the second generation of the CCP now sort of taking over and getting primacy, and that as you're like on your way up and as you become successful and they see you're doing well and they see you're being successful, the party reaches out, comes to you and they say, hey, you're doing really well. We want to offer you membership in the party. And at that point, it's a Faustian bargain because it's kind of like when the mafia comes to you and says, do you want to join? No. There's no saying no. And so if you buy in, right, you get riches, you get power, you can be as successful as you want, as high as you want. But then you look at a guy like Jack Ma. So Jack Ma was essentially the richest guy in China, multi-billionaire, founded Alibaba, just untold amounts of wealth. But then he said that he wanted to create a personal banking system.
Oh.
So kind of like PayPal, but like individual banks for all the users. And he started going forward with it. And the party said no. And he started doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And then he disappeared.
Yeah. That's how it works there.
Because they were sending a message. They were sending a message to everybody else. You go along with the plan. You go along with the party. Xi Jinping, by the way, so he's going to declare himself the paramount leader for life later this year at the 20th Party Congress in November. He has gone through and made, for the past 10 years, since he became the leader in China, he's made this whole hallmark of his reign to be purging any and all opposition within the ranks, within the departments. And you think, by the way, we've got a lot of departments in the federal government? You would not believe the administrative levels that there are in China or Russia. It's just Byzantine, absolutely Byzantine. Any opposition, he crushes them. And the biggest TV show in China for the last 5 years has been the televised confessions of the corrupt officials.
That's disgusting.
So, and it's not
the
even...
state TV pushes it out. It's like a broadcast?
That state TV broadcast.
Oh, I gotta get my hands on that.
On a daily basis. So when people talk about these struggle sessions of like the People's Proletarian Revolution, great, from the 1960s, no, they still do it now, but they do it on TV.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the Cultural Revolution stories of people having to do that.
The culture, it's horrific. It's
and
one of the most horrific
what
things.
you're mentioning, that transition, it also helped propagandize their image throughout the world, because now our generations grew up seeing China as the industrialized, capitalist version with the Saks Fifth Avenue, with the KFCs, with the McDonald's, all that stuff. And so we can't make the correlation that, the China from a few decades ago and from the 50s, 60s, 70s, the one-child policy, everything that happened then, that's the same one that we're dealing with today. That is broken in our minds because it's almost like two different Chinas.
It's certainly a new China. I mean, there's no question about that. And
same dirty tactics, though.
And when you think about all the people, 1.6 billion people that are just controlled and under this system, and there's so many good people there.
For sure.
There's so many good
It's
people.
horrific.
They come to Laobaixing, just the regular average people, and I spent all that time living there, and they wake up, they want to go to work, they hope there's no traffic on their way into the office. They have had one kid, now they're starting to allow multiple. So the way it works is if you were part of the one child generation, then you can have multiple kids.
Oh, yay.
And so
How lucky.
But think of it, right? Imagine pinning all your hopes and dreams for the next generation, and you've only got one shot.
Mm-hmm.
You've got one kid.
Yeah.
And that's it. So it really is this huge psychological bomb and ticking bomb for China writ large that I don't think has really been dealt with in a mass psychology kind of way for a lot of reasons. Just this idea that people are looking at it and saying, this is my next generation, and it's going to be just diminished because of this. And it's all because of government policy. It's all because of the party. It's all because of this authoritarianism. And I think there's so many people who they want to have strong families. They want to live their lives. They want to be able to be successful. I wasn't walking around China and people were talking about how do we destroy America and all this stuff. No, it's not like that. It's not like some, it's not North Korea and some crazy 1930s Russia kind of thing. It's a real country with real people, and they have their perspective on life. And I wish that we as a country could do more to understand that rather than try to come up with these Hollywood Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of explanations for everything.
So interesting. Now we've got to wrap it up because you got to head to your next show because you're a busy man. But let's talk about ending the bureaucratic living government organism, whatever you were calling it earlier. It was a really good term. What is it? The organism state?
The organic state. The organic state. No, that's not me. That's Wilson, or the organic state.
Okay, Wilson said organic state.
This was his dream, by the way. This was Wilson's dream.
Well, congrats to him. How do we end it? Tell us. I saw President Trump was talking about if he gets back in office, he is going to make it so that the president can fire a bureaucrat. Is that a big solution? I think yes.
That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's a huge thing. So it also creates a kind of sort of Damocles over the heads of anyone in government.
They're so self-righteous.
But at the same time, it's, I think there's a lot of ways to deal with this. We have this Leviathan state, right? And the way to deal, so it has to be multifaceted, right? Yeah. And that's the main thing. So on some levels, yes, sort of Damocles, firing people that are way out of line, full-on communists have to go. They just have to go. They cannot be in government anymore. That's number one. But number two is you have to also have this cadre that's coming up that's being prepared to take over this, to get it to the point where you can break it down to a manageable size, relocate massive parts of it, throughout the country. Why is it all located in Washington, D.C. still? Yeah. Throw some of it out in Texas, throw it in Wichita Falls, put, the Department of Education out in the Midwest somewhere. These are also great ideas I've heard from a lot of people. Put the EPA actually in some place that has connection with the real environment. Crazy thought. And then third is so these are, so you have your near term, your medium term, and then your long term. And then long term has to be an understanding that as a society, we are a broken society because we are broken people, because human nature is broken people, because of the fall, because of original sin, because of Adam and Eve, and because of the fall of the garden. And so with that, we have to understand human nature is what it is. And there's an understanding as well that things that are sinful are actually bad for you and are actually bad for society. And we're learning that more and more because we thought as a society we could embrace hedonism, like I was talking about in Brave New World, but it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work on the long term. It doesn't scale, right? It actually destroys and it corrupts and they used to talk about the managed decline of the American empire, right? We're in it's complete free fall now at this point. And so you have to turn the society, and it's tough and it's not going to be easy, but you can use technology to spread these ideas of traditionalism, of traditional morality, traditional relationships, and push that forward and push that message as saying, look, this works. That other thing, yeah, it might look fancy and it might look flashy, but it don't work. Don't work.
That. Jack Posobiec, Thank you for joining Freedom Papers. We really appreciate it. We really touch on a bunch of random topics because it's all pertaining to these core beliefs and getting back to that ratification debate, but man, it can really relate to a few things, including communist China. Thanks for bringing your insight. We appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity.
You guys, please give us 5 stars. Please subscribe to the podcast, and please go watch the video version on YouTube under Turning Point USA. Jack Pozo, thank you so much. Thanks for watching.